Sex trafficking is the use of force, fraud, or coercion. This pornographer sat across from me and I asked him, like, how do you get a girl from here to here? He goes, so first of all, I will tell her that she's going to do a vanilla sex scene and she's going to make X amount of money. And he said, I do that because I want her to spend the money in her head. So when she gets to set, I have more control over where things go from there. He says, we get halfway through the shoot and then I flip the script and I say, well, now in order to get paid, you're going to need to do this, this, and this. You've already kind of like crossed that line, but now you're not going to get any money unless you follow through with these other things that you wouldn't normally do. Then he looked at me and he said, so tell me, how is that not trafficking? Yeah, that is trafficking. Really crazy to think that you're consciously aware of that.
Benji, my brother, welcome to the Superhuman Life.
Hey, Frank, thanks for having me on.
Yeah, man, really, really excited, man. And I know I told you before we hit record here, but I want the audience to hear this as well. I just want to recognize you, man, and tell you thank you from, the deepest part of my heart for the work that you do. It obviously plays a close tie to the work that we do here. And really, when I learned the connection between trafficking and pornography, which was early stages of this podcast, it was something like I just couldn't turn away. And it always brings me back to a quote that I like to start at least these episodes with. And I think the credit was given to Einstein. I don't know if the quote is his, but at least that's where I find it. And it's, the world will not be destroyed by those who do evil, but rather by those who sit and watch them without doing anything. That I butchered a quote as I'm reading it. Good job, Frank. But it's basically saying like, it's not, the world will not be destroyed by those that are actually doing the evil, but by those that are just sitting there and watching it take place. So I'm curious with you, like, how do you just process that quote? And if we can go all the way back to the beginning, because I know you've been about 15 years in this work, what was really the inspiration for you to dive deep into really some of the darkest parts of the world?
I think probably some of the similar things for you, discovering the issue of trafficking for the first time kind of puts a different perspective on the issue of pornography and just seeing the world through that lens. I remember, going through this college class that I had, and my professor was a Shakespearean actor when he was in college and became a very renowned history professor, and his lectures were just incredible. And when he talked about slavery, for me at that time, I always thought of it as something that happened in the past. And I had this impression, man, if I was around back then, I would have done something to stop this. And so I just remember hearing about human trafficking for the first time, and it just kind of altered my whole perspective of life. And so, yeah, I think for me, it was just kind of working back from there and just going, wow, like this is something that's happening now currently in our world. Like I need to do something about it. So I didn't have any conception of what that would look like or the years that I would dedicate to this. But it was just that initial impulse of this is so awful and I have to do something about this.
What time frame? What year are we talking about here? And what was it that you were getting exposed to? Like what in terms of the trafficking? At least at that point, I know it's obviously evolved over the years with pornography being a big driver. But what was the year kind of time frame for you, and what were some of that early introductions to the trafficking world for you?
So, yeah, it was early 2007, February 3rd, 2007 is when I first heard the term human trafficking. And it kind of put into my mind the knowledge that there are women out there who are being forced into lifestyles of systematic rape. And for me, I didn't understand the scope of what was involved in that, or the multi-layered nuance of how trafficking operates, but just the knowledge that there were these um, people who were being forced into this was just so just heartrending. So yeah, so my journey really started from there. But I would say prior to that, I also had kind of a couple experiences that I look back on just growing up and stuff that I think kind of maybe in some ways was uniquely predisposed me towards really responding to an injustice like this with a full investment. Um, and so, yeah, I've had more time now to kind of process my own journey and look back on that. But February 3rd, 2007 is really, I would say, was my burning bush moment when I sort of, you know, unwittingly dedicated my life to fighting trafficking.
Yeah, did you know? I mean, obviously, I can't imagine you foresaw what it was going to become. But did you know that it was something that you were going to be involved in for a lengthy amount of time, and that you were going to be producing films or documentaries? Or how did 2008 bring us to today with all the work, the award-winning films, the documentaries, 35 million people reached, with everything like connected between the 15 years there, if you can, a little bit.
Yeah, for sure. There was definitely like a snowball effect in terms of the escalating kind of nature of my involvement with this. So just going back to that initial moment, February 3rd, 2007, I discover this issue of human trafficking. It just wrecks me. And my mind is racked with the knowledge and the thought that, one of the first stories I heard was a story of a 15-year-old girl who went outside to say hi to a friend and was pulled into the back of a car, driven around their town, duct tape, had a gun pointed to her head, taken to an apartment, gang raped, held in a dog kennel, prostituted out, through ads on Craigslist all day, every day for 40 days until the police raided the place and she was rescued. But they were keeping her in a little dog kennel under a bed. Again, just going back to that moment of my God, like this is happening out there. It's real. And what can I do? So so later I had an encounter that would help me understand kind of the providential nature of this. Initially, I just felt like, my human instinct was I have to do something. I think especially for us as men, I think we're wired in a way to fight injustice. And I talk to guys all the time that are like, "Man, tell me where the brothel's at, and I'll go, kick the doors down and like throw the people." So there's like, I think like guys, like we're ready to be deployed to the battlefield to go after something like this. That's sort of like how I felt. But but years later, I had this chance encounter with somebody up in Northern California. So I was going to a meeting up there, and there was a trafficking survivor there, and everyone was saying happy birthday to her. So I said happy birthday, and she said happy birthday to you. And I was like, no, my birthday was back in November, but thanks for thinking of me or whatever. And she goes, no, today is February 3rd. She said, and she goes, I heard you talk about the first time you heard of human trafficking being on February 3rd, 2007. She said, so I never forgot that because on February 3rd, 2007, I was in prison because I wouldn't testify against my trafficker. She said, and I got down on my knees that day and I prayed that for my birthday gift, that God would raise somebody up to expose this evil injustice. So February 3rd, 2007, this human trafficking survivor is in prison. I don't know her. She's in some other part of the country, down on her knees praying for God to raise somebody up to fight this injustice. February 3rd, 2007, I discover this issue for the first time that sets me on a whole different course in life that I was not planning on. So I look back on some of those things and I just see in many ways the hand of providence kind of guiding me into this fight. And the more deeply invested that I have become in the fight against human trafficking, the more important those kind of things have become to me because this is like such a dark issue. And it's easy to have a knee jerk reaction and a flash in the pan response, but to actually dig your heels in and make intentional decisions over the course of years to fight this injustice, you need something more than, human ingenuity and a good idea, a bit of inspiration. Like it's just a really dark, intense uphill battle fighting trafficking. February 3rd sort of lit the fuse, and then as I began to learn and to discover, I really became gripped with a vision to tell the world what was going on. And that became my primary focus. I had a bit of a background in film, and I decided to kind of marry these two passions together. I was going to take my passion for filmmaking and storytelling and marry it with my passion for this newly found passion for this injustice. And so I set out on a journey across 4 continents, 19 countries, and 42 cities to document this global phenomenon of sex trafficking. And when I was finished with that project and we released that film, it really opened up the doors on so many levels that just accelerated all the ideas that were stirring in me of how to fight this. And so yeah, now I mean 15 years later, it's crazy to look back and see how much has been done. But that was sort of how I got kind of initially drawn into this.
Yeah, what a beautiful kind of story there with the dates kind of lining up, and it's powerful, man. How God will sometimes use, like, the gifts that He's given to us, oftentimes not in the area that we believe we're going to. I'm assuming, like, when you were studying film, when you were learning coming up, like, you had no idea like it was going to lead you down this path. When I got into speaking and coaching and all the things that I'm doing, the men inside of Rebuild Recovery, like, I never thought when I was learning, leadership development and public speaking in my early 20s, that was going to be on a podcast talking about, these dark, sensitive subjects. But it's all on His plan, man. So that's truly amazing. Obviously, I want to get to, really your more recent film here with Beyond Fantasy, which is, really shining some light to the dark sides of pornography. But I want to connect the dots here because I think a lot of people will hear trafficking and they're like, oh, that's that crime that's kind of going on over here, and they don't see the connection between pornography. So can we kind of maybe bridge the gap, and kind of how you bring the two worlds together with trafficking and pornography, kind of lead us into, really the more recent work you guys are doing?
Yeah, so when we were out filming and investigating sex trafficking in the creation of our first documentary, Nefarious, is when I started to see these five overlapping areas where pornography was intersecting and overlapping with sex trafficking. And so the lines were very like blurred between the two. It wasn't I started to understand that these weren't two mutually exclusive entities of the sex industry, that they're very intertwined. I had an encounter that also kind of really just drew my attention to the subject of pornography. And after we released Nefarious, I gathered our team back together and basically we whiteboarded out a session of saying, hey, we need to look deeply at this issue from a human rights and public health perspective. So the way that pornography is being created, the impact on performers, and then how pornography is impacting consumers. And so we had that meeting in 2012 and then spent the next 8 years diving deep into an investigation of and research of pornography. So I went deep into investigating the porn industry, have made few different documentaries that even now we're still kind of releasing, and then read and researched everything that's ever been written on pornography. And in at the end of 2019, going into 2020, was really the moment where our season changed, and we went from a season of investigation and research into um, yeah, deploying those findings into an aggressive effort to move the needle on several aspects of pornography. And that started with the trafficking campaign.
I was going to say, was that the Trafficking Hub campaign in late 2019? I think that's when I originally found
Yeah.
found the work that you guys were doing.
So in 20 so at the beginning of 2020 is when we launched the Trafficking Hub campaign that was focused on bringing accountability to Pornhub and their parent company, MindGeek, for enabling videos of real abuse and trafficking, revenge porn, all these criminal videos to be hosted and distributed on their website. And then in 2021, we launched a new campaign in conjunction with the release of a documentary we did called Raised on Porn. And that campaign was called Protect Children, Not Porn. and it was and that campaign was calling for age verification walls to be mandated for the hosting and distributing of all pornographic content online. And then in 2022, this year, we've started a new campaign in conjunction with the release of a new docu-series. The docu-series is called Beyond Fantasy, and the campaign is called End Teen Porn. And that and this newest campaign is focused on raising the age of consent for entry into porn from 18 to 21 years old. And so when we started this internally, we referred to it as Operation Rolling Thunder. We knew we were getting ready to deploy several waves of um, attack in terms of focusing on really substantive issues concerning pornography and um, bringing accountability to perpetrators, freedom of healing to victims, and actually fundamentally altering the way that pornography is even able to be in our world. And so we are 3 years deep into that season, and we've got several years to go as we keep driving towards these changes. But yeah, these past few years has been a huge season change for us as an organization, and we've been on a full frontal assault.
Yeah, and it's led a lot of changes taking place. Can you kind of maybe talk about some of the the changes to Pornhub that have come out of the Trafficking Hub campaign? I know that there's been millions of videos removed. I'm not sure if you've if they've gotten the age verification. I mean, even as of recent, the last couple of weeks, like with the Instagram accounts getting pulled, obviously that's all tied back. So, what have been some of some of the win successes coming out of these campaigns?
Yeah, so just kind of real quick, kind of low hanging fruit bullet points. In February of 2020, my colleague Lila, who was our director of abolition at the time, released an op-ed for the Washington Examiner called "It's Time to Shut Down Pornhub." And then the very next day, the BBC released an article about the story of Rose Kalemba, somebody who was a victim of Pornhub. And the timing of that happening in successive days was just crazy because the BBC had been working on their story for a year, and it just synced up that way. Both those stories went viral, and we launched a petition call uh, to to um, to call Pornhub to account and and basically to shut them down and hold their executives accountable. That petition really went viral as well, and I think it's currently at like 2.4 million signatures. But we decided to do a short animated video to help tell the story so people could widely kind of connect with and understand what Pornhub was doing. Because part of the issue was that Pornhub as a company had really endeared themselves to the culture. It was their kind of like PR strategy to become porn chic and to be this um, cheeky pop culture porn brand that would normalize the use of pornography widely across our culture. And so I think it was really shocking for people to discover the criminal nature of what was their website was infested with. And so we told that in a 2 minute short animated video. We told that story. And that video went viral, got 34 million views across our social platforms. It was one of the most viral videos of all time. And then that caught the attention of Nick Kristof from the New York Times, who did his own investigation and wrote an article called The Children of Pornhub. That article was released in December of 2020 and resulted in the major credit card companies severing ties with Pornhub. And then Pornhub responded by um, well, to one of the demands that we had put out there, which is deleting all their non-verified videos. So 80% of their website they deleted overnight. They removed the download feature that was a huge part of the problem in terms of the structure and the model of their how they were, getting this pornography, and then and the ability of people to download someone else's exploitation and then repopulate it on other sites and so forth. So they removed that, but it didn't end there. The New Yorker did an article earlier this year, and the CEO and COO stepped down. We've heard rumors that 70 to 80% of their staff have been laid off, And most recently, their Instagram account, which had 13 million followers, has been deleted, permanently deleted. So there, systems of oppression will always resist movements of freedom. And there, I, I love the quote, I think it was by Martin Luther King, who said, "There's no progress without struggle." So it's not that we discover that something's wrong and then wave a wand over it and tomorrow it goes away. It's, we discover these systems of injustice, these malevolent forces of darkness and exploitation that have organized and integrated themselves into our world, and then we pull up our sleeves, pull up our bootstraps, and dig in to do the hard work of uprooting these systems of injustice. And so we are in that battle right now, and we're just grateful for the tribe that has come around us in this fight. There's a lot of people out there who I think had a latent um, uh, view of pornography, that like they knew something's not right here. And I think a lot of people may be compromised by their own pornography use. Like, something's not right with this, but I'm also not looking too deeply because I'm just using it to get off or whatever. So I think what we began to do is give language to these latent feelings that pornography that people had, that something's wrong with this. As these campaigns began to take shape, it started to galvanize an army of people who began to throw away their own pornography and get on board with, no, we have to hold these perpetrators accountable and bring justice to the victims. So it created visibility for the true harm that was happening. And and it's really this larger tribe. It's people like Lila who have been such a vehement, relentless voice. It's other people, like soccer moms that have chosen to sign the petition and share it with their friends. And so across the board, there's just so many people who've been a part of seeing this movement really gain momentum. And right now, it poses an existential threat to the existence of MindGeek, who owns 90% of all online pornography. And it is going to fundamentally change the way that pornography is able to be in our world. So it's a pretty incredible story of how how the world is changing as a result of these pains and people joining in with them.
In real time. It's been cool as some of an outsider, knowing Lila, guys, and definitely I'll share it down in the show notes. We had Lila on episode 76, so check that one out because we really dive into that trafficking hub campaign. But it's been really cool for me. Just one, I've been having the conversation around porn and porn addiction for about 3.5 years, and seeing the acceptance, across the board, on different podcasts, larger type of shows, just people beginning to wake up and understand my side of things. But obviously it's a whole lot dark with you. You talked about there were five kind of overlapping areas between trafficking and pornography. I don't think we got those five. What came up in your findings with the areas of the overlapping?
Yeah, let me see if I can unpack those. Okay, so we're on the road. We're looking at the issue of sex trafficking, and we go into a red light district. And one of the first things is that they would use pornography of these women to market women in prostitution. So oftentimes these women were taken from other countries and brought to foreign countries to disorient them, and then the pornography was being used to market them. So you'd be walking through a red light district, somebody walk up, hand you a card, hey, do you want to go blah 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 blah? And to just an average guy that doesn't understand what's happening, maybe there's a seduction there, right? Of like, you can see this person naked here, and now you can go pay $50 to have sex with them over there. So pornography was used in the marketing of sex trafficking. And then the second thing is that people who were in these exploited positions were also forced to make pornography. So um, so they would be required to be in videos of pornography, and this has become a huge thing in terms of our message of helping people understand that even in the best case scenario, you know, in terms of your own intentions with pornography or whatever, you just simply do not know who's on the other side of that screen. And so we found that traffickers were making forcing these women to make pornography. So that was the second thing. The third thing we discovered is that pornography was fueling the appetites of the Johns. We started interviewing sex buyers. Now, sex buyers are at the very root of this whole issue because if men stopped buying women and children for sex, the entire industry of sex trafficking would implode overnight, and we would see the largest exodus of human beings from systematic oppression that the world has ever seen. So, I think understanding sex trafficking through that lens of supply and demand is really important because it puts the ownership on men to be a part of the solution and not to participate in this. The problem is that because we're growing up in this pornographic age, so many young boys have grown up with early childhood exposure to pornography that has hijacked their sexuality and and derailed them. And by the time many of these people reach adulthood, it has its tentacles so deep in them that their their ability to control their own sexuality has become compromised. And um, so we saw that the that pornography played a critical role in fueling the appetites of men who were going out and paying to have sex with these women. Every single John that we talked to had a prior history of pornography consumption that started with early childhood exposure. So we saw where pornography was playing a role on that level with the demand side. Two other
Was
things.
it? I'm sorry, Benji. Was it as specifically as early childhood exposure for these men? I mean, that was across the board, universal with all of them. Not that they had a pornography problem, but that it was rooted in early childhood exposure.
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
When I say early childhood, I'm talking, I mean, trying to think of the old.
8, 9, 10, 11.
Yeah, yeah, some
Yeah.
younger, but I'm not talking 17. Like,
Yeah, but it's important. It's an important discussion because I think the average age of first exposure right now, depending on kind of where you look at it, maybe you can speak to this a little bit. I think is around 11 years old. So you talked about the raise on porn, this whole culture. Like we are not intentionally doing it, but if that is a universal across all the board, I mean, we can understand why it's becoming such a massive issue.
so there's two other things. Uh, One is pornography was being used to groom children, who were being used as sex trafficking victims. So the traffickers would acquire these children, and then pornography was the way in which they indoctrinated them to what would be expected of them. And there was a seasoning process that these kids would be taken through where pornography was their training vehicle. And then the fifth thing is once we actually began to investigate the porn industry itself, like the mainstream porn industry, we discovered that um, the main backdrop of the creation of most pornography was the use of coercion to get women to do certain acts in pornography. So, sex trafficking is the use of force, fraud, or coercion in leveraging somebody into performing commercial sex act. And so, by definition, the way in which most mainstream pornography was being created was actually a form of sex trafficking. So I'll break that down for you just to kind of help kind of illuminate this point. This pornographer sat across from me and he said, and I asked him, like, how do you, how do you do that? Like, how do you get a girl from here to here? And he goes, well, in other words, from, the girl next door, everyday person who's living their life to now she's having sex with, you know, fill in the blank. I'm not going to put any ideas people said, but like fill in the blank. There's all kinds of scenarios that just kind
Trust me, yeah, I think the audience will have enough of imagination to know at least where you were going there. Yeah.
so he goes, okay, he goes, so first of all, I will tell her that she's gonna do a vanilla sex scene and she's gonna make X amount of money. And he said, and I do that because I want her to spend the money in her head. So when she gets to set, I have more control over what we go where things go from there. So he knows that, and for a lot of these girls, they are brought in from other cities. So agents will go out around the US and they recruit girls into porn. And a lot of them come from other places and then are put up in model houses where they have to pay exorbitant rents, they have to pay drivers, they have to pay agency fees. So it's there's really an aspect of financial coercion that also becomes a part of this. Um, but again, let's just say in a best case scenario that somebody's living independently in their own apartment and is from Los Angeles or whatever. Even those situations, he's still putting an idea in her head where she's going to spend that money. And so that she needs to follow through with this shoot in order to get the money that she's already spent in her head. So he's explaining this all to me. He says, we get halfway through the shoot, and then I flip the script and I say, well, now in order to get paid, you're going to need to do this, this, and this. And then the way he explained it was that once you have everybody there on set, you've already had sex. You've already kind of like crossed that line, but now you're not going to get any money unless you follow through with these other things that you wouldn't normally do. Then he looked at me and he said, so tell me, how is that not trafficking? And that was coming straight from the horse's mouth of somebody who was making this content asked me that. And, and so for me, I'm like, yeah, first of all, that is a that is trafficking, first of all. And second of all, it's really crazy to think that you're consciously aware of that and deploying these tactics um, in a very like a lot of these guys are master manipulators. I mean, they are traffickers, and so understanding, so beginning to learn that, beginning to see that, and to unpack that, how that was happening in the mainstream porn industry was really a game changer because it removed the argument that like, well, yeah, there's that stuff that's a little bit shady, but then there's this stuff over here. It's like, no, actually, even in the area of pornography that people would say is like above board, they're still deploying highly coercive tactics to manipulate girls into doing things that they wouldn't otherwise do. That's just one part of it. I mean, but it's from the get go. The entire porn industry operates as a system of coercion from the moment that a girl first steps foot in an agent's office. The manipulation and the coercion begins. Because what's going to happen is he's going to put a piece of paper in front of her and he's going to say, okay, this is your yes and no list. And there's a whole bunch of descriptions of sex acts. So, and you write on there, yes to this, no to this. Well, they're informed right off the bat from their agent that, well, if you don't do this, this, and this, then you're not going to get work. And then the agent actually uses his own influence over that person to pressure them into doing things. So, so I'll dry up your work. Now, the way it plays out is once a girl has appeared on camera, in some respects, her life is ruined from that moment. In some respects, in certain situations, because how do you walk back from that? At least that's the mentality, and the agents know this, and they use that mentality to then, hey, well, you've already done this. Where are you going to go from here? You might as well now do this, this, and this, or I'm going to dry up your work. So they sort of attach themselves to the girl as like, you need me to survive now. And and then other things like if you don't if you don't escort for me on the side. There's one pornographer that was indicted for trafficking because he was operating a escort agency on the side and then telling girls, if you don't escort over here for me on the side, then I'm not going to give you work on this side. So at every level, there's so many layers to this, but we began to discover as we investigated this how the entire porn industry was operating fundamentally as a system of coercion that was taking advantage of and preying upon the vulnerabilities of predominantly young women and getting them to do all this crazy stuff in porn. So the cover narrative that's out there is, oh, these girls want this, they like this, they deserve this, they're making money off of this. There's a very two-dimensional impression. And if anything's wrong, well, it's her fault. And so that's the impression. The deeper truth is that these girls are in a very complicated, confused, highly manipulated and coerced position. And the truth is that they are not this subspecies of human beings who live and breathe only to be penetrated by any number of strange men in any number of strange ways. They are three-dimensional people with history, preferences, and desires, and complexities, and hormones, um, and all of these things. And all pornography attempts to eradicate all of that in these women. We could go on. I'm going on and on, but
No, no, this is. I mean, God, this is just hitting real hard. I mean, these are young women. These are girls, 18, 19. It's not like they're going to recruiting grown women that, have lives and have had, experiences. Like they're getting these girls young and prime. And it's interesting you ended the way that you did, because at the end of the first part of Beyond Fantasy, I think is Max. Is that the pornographer's name? The kind of hard, like the big hardcore guy. You're having the conversation, and he talks about what he's doing is he's just bringing to the world what is happening. They're just recording it. So inside of his mind, he's like, no, this is going to happen whether or not we're recording it and filming it. We're just showing the world what is going to happen whether or not. So I'm curious, like, what is the makeup of these men? And as a man, you made the comment, for me, this personally for me, you made the comment about, you get guys all the time. They're like, where's the brothel? Like, we're going to go kick the doors down, like ready to go, ready to fight. As you're sitting across from these guys, how are you able to just sit there calm when clearly, like, the rational thing to do is just reach across and just slug the guy and just take him out? I mean, how are you handling this as a man doing this work?
yeah, it was definitely, a challenging thing to go in and to confront some of these men. And I would say that there's there's a there's a variety of different people in the porn industry, ranging from full-blown sociopath to somebody who's a family man and believes that they are, following strong ethics in what they do. And so I met people who on one hand, I would say they genuinely believed themselves to be a good person. And so these conversations were interesting because as I was making this documentary, I was really bringing some of these ethical issues to bear and giving them an opportunity to answer for themselves. And some of them were very honest. I don't have an answer for that. And I could tell there was some self-reflection going on. So there were those people. Um, but there were others who were full-blown sociopaths and again, very consciously aware of the kind of manipulative I mean, there's the guy you mentioned, Max Hardcore. He's I What I was trying to do, because I'm playing a role in what's happening here. And I so in a way, I have to remove myself in a way from kind of like that human instinct to immediately react to an abuser or an oppressor with violence. Um, and I have to be conscious that I'm playing a role in this. So I have to suspend that part of myself while also being present to the person I'm interviewing in order to extract from them a deeper understanding of their own psychology. And my strategy was, how do I get these guys to relive in the context of this interview what they want to see happen on a porn set? And the reason why that was important to me is because I'd seen so many of them give their pat answers. A lot of these people are used to being in front of the media. They have their sound bites, and but it's just a game that they play. It's their sound bites that they're used to giving. So we wanted to get past that and really to allow them to be who they are in the presence of the interview and on camera so that so that our viewers could have a more deeply authentic connection with the reality of who these pornographers are and the content that they're trying to create. And so at one point in the interview, I would ask, so I asked this Max Hardcore to describe. I said, "Eh, help me understand what you want to see happen in a scene." So he begins to go there in his mind, and this is the point at which the interview suddenly changed, and his eyes literally changed, and suddenly I can see he's there, and he's like reliving this, and he goes, "So she's on set, and she's shivering, and she's shaking, and describing kind of the buildup of this, how the intensity of the way that he approaches these scenes brings these girls to this point where they're like shivering and shaking and overwhelmed. And because he's mainly targeting people who've never done it before, because he wants them to be overwhelmed in the context of filming a scene and then to capture that on camera. And he goes, and then I just lay it on harder and I lay it on harder and I lay it on harder until they snap, until they're on a heap and a heap on the floor. And he goes, and that's the most beautiful thing in the world. And um, so I said to him, "You sound like a sociopath. Are you?" And he said, "Well," he said, "I don't know exactly what a sociopath is, but I'm a hardcore pornographer, and I didn't get here overnight. It's taken me 25 years to get to this point." He goes on describing, his pornography, and at one point I just said, "What you're describing sounds like a full-blown sexual assault." And then he laughed and he was like, he like chuckled and he was like, "Well, yeah, it's a full-blown ass fucking assault because that's what people want to see." So he is dialed into an audience of people whose minds have become so depraved by years of pornography use and consumption that the only thing left to bring them arousal is this more intense brand of pornography in which he can show young women having their innocence stripped away from them on camera and having their humanity completely fractured and destroyed, and then feed that as kind of the heady wine to this audience of people whose own conscience has been destroyed. So he does a lot. He does a lot. So his videos are engineered from that perspective, and then he also. Sorry, I'll just stop there for a second because this is.
No, man. No, I mean, there were points within the film, Benji, when he's going through the closet and he's talking about the clothes and describing these little petite physiques. It's like I had to stop and get up and leave and collect myself to come back just to finish the film. I mean, I hope the audience is getting an understanding of what type of men are behind this. And I highly recommend everybody check out the first part of Beyond Fantasy because it just exposes you to, I don't even have a word, just the darkness of the reality of the wiring of these men. I have a question here, Benji. Like you talked about, like, or he said it, he's creating what the people want, what the market is now demanding. Is this a byproduct of the porn culture? Like, I mean, and if so, where is this going to lead us to? I mean, in another 4 years. Do you understand the question? Like, is the demand getting more and more intense because of what boys are being exposed to and being raised up on? And I know this is not, this would be more your thoughts and opinions around where does it lead to? Like, does it lead to the point where we're watching pornography and we click a button and we can have sex with that person in a 3D world type of thing? Yeah, just where do you see it going? And is it a product of the cult? Like, is the demand becoming what it is because of the increase in porn and porn addiction?
Yeah. I think that we are a part of a social experiment that none of us signed up for and is unprecedented in history. when people make the argument that, well, pornography's always been around, I mean, what they're talking about is like, hieroglyphic images that were carved into the side of a cave. Like the potency of those images is not comparable to what people are exposed to today. I love the way that Gary Wilson said this. He's like, you might see 10, hot babes in your entire lifetime, 100 years ago, where today you can see those quote unquote hot babes completely nude in the most, you know, graphic sex acts in seconds, and then add hundreds and yea thousands more on top of it. So we are truly living in a unique time. We are living in this era in which we've been born into a media saturated, image based world that has been hardwired technologically with the ability to transport images to every corner of the earth of the most potent, graphic, hardcore, body punishing, vile, um, way possible. And then provided no protections. So the internet is a city without walls. There are no protections for children online. I mean, Twitter, being one of the largest platforms in the world, welcomes 13-year-olds onto their platform while also setting up their platform for the widespread distribution of graphic hardcore pornography without any censorship. So there are no protections for children in our world. So, when you stand back and you look at those dynamics, it's really heartbreaking because what you see is a situation where a young generation sexuality is going to be colonized through exposure to this graphic imagery, and then where does that lead them? Well, we're seeing right now, in one aspect, how pornography is contributing to this mushroom cloud of demand for illicit sex around the world. There are 1.5 million purchases of sex in Germany every day. 1.5 million purchases of sex in Spain every day. There was another study done in Brazil. 70% of men in Brazil participate in buying sex. Same in Cambodia. So places where studies are being done, we're seeing where there are dramatic numbers of men, like never before in history now, participating and paying for illicit sex. So when people ask the question, 42 million people trapped in the sex industry around the world, and how has sex trafficking become $100 billion per year industry? I think when you look at these other dynamics, it makes complete sense. And so what we're seeing is pornography pouring gasoline on the fire, and unchecked, the trajectory of this will lead our planet into a hyper dehumanized planet that lives only out of primal instincts. And some people would argue that is just a very human thing. For me, part of what uniquely qualifies us as human is our capacity for empathy, our desire for emotional connection, and some of those things that transcend, just the animal kingdom. And but I think we're seeing an abandonment of that in so many ways. And so yeah, so these campaigns for us are sounding the alarm. And the positive thing is that I do believe that we can bring about change, and it's just at this point the internet is still relatively new, and we have a lot of work cut out for us. Is really the bottom line.
Yeah. So what can people do? Obviously, men here listening, like get your, if you're struggling, get yourself under control first, become a light for others. But maybe parents specifically that are listening, or what can you see maybe big tech kind of playing a role in this? So what do you see as kind of the steps moving forward? Obviously, in addition to jumping on board with you guys, the campaign, supporting it, signing the petitions, and just spreading the word. What are some people, things that people can walk away with today to jump on board and help?
Yeah, I'd say, I think it starts individually, and then extends out to our own sphere of influence, and then out from there. And so we are right now organizing premiere tour for a film called Buying Her, and and that is a film that explores the demand for sex trafficking. It's the first film ever done on the men who buy sex. And the way that I think about this is that men's demand for illicit sex is like a septic tank that needs to be emptied. It's 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 become normalized, and men's demand for illicit sex has become normalized, and it has gone unchecked. And and yes, not every man is going who every boy who looks at pornography is going to become a sex buyer, but the film deals with issues that we all struggle and wrestle with. And we as men, we struggle with our identity. We struggle with our sexuality. So I think the film is going to be a catalyst to invite men into this conversation around the subject of sex trafficking like never before. And then I'm releasing a book alongside of this called Raised on Porn, which will be a great resource to for people to be able to more fully digest an understanding of what pornography is and what we can do about it. And so half the book is dedicated to framing and giving an understanding of pornography and its impact on us. And the second half of the book is what we can do about it, personally, in our society, in our relationships, with our children, in all these different respects. So it's the most comprehensive, in-depth book written on this subject. And I think it's going to be a really helpful resource to go along with this film. So, so yeah, I think that, for us right now at this moment, I'm really excited to connect with you and your community because it is a pivot for us as Exodus Cry, um, to begin putting a emphasis on men and inviting men into this conversation, and for us as men to really begin to take responsibility for this issue. I love Tony Porter's line. He says, "We don't indict men, we invite men." And a perspective that most men are good men, but we good men need to work together to bring accountability to those who, are causing an enormous amount of damage in our world. It's important that we create a healthy community of men, and that we create a safe place for men to come together and to wrestle with these issues. And unfortunately, I've seen demographics of men organize around a criticism of women, that appears to have a measure of truth to it, but ultimately becomes toxic. And I've seen the same thing on the side of women, demographics of women looking at men, and then, there's a measure of truth in it, right? And then it's, well, now all men are pigs. So it hurts me to see how the wound between men and women and that divide growing and growing and growing. The, 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 the challenging work is to see each other's core inherent value as humans and to understand the struggle that's underneath the behavior. And so instead of as men, us looking at, the surface level behavior going, first of all, you have value. And what's the struggle going on underneath that has destroyed your trust or, whatever, and vice versa. And so, but this work is not going to happen on the run. It really has to happen with intentionality. So, inviting men into this conversation. So we're doing this screening tour. We're going to be inviting men, and then several things beyond that. But at Exodus Cry, these campaigns hinge on participation from people. So signing the petition, sharing stuff, um, just yeah, being involved in all the calls to action that we're constantly putting out. I'm not asking somebody, hey, can you go make, a documentary or whatever? But when we make one, it's like if you wouldn't mind supporting, go up to a screening, bring it to your city, share it with your pastor, community leader, on and on.
Yeah, that's incredible, and it's a call to all the men out there. That's exactly why I opened up with the quote from Einstein, like I did, because I know we were going to lead and we were going to end on this point. So, I'm involved with two, anti-human trafficking organizations here. One that's on the front end of really raising awareness, getting into schools, getting into the community, getting into organizations, and just raising the awareness on the conversation. The second one provides safe houses, a lot of great care. We're building a community center, just raised over $600,000 at an event earlier this month. The problem here, then, though, men, is when I step into these organizations, they're led by 95% women, like, which is a good thing, but we do need more men out there. We need men that are going, and this is what they tell me. They're like, when I reach out, what do you need? What do you need? Like, we need men, we need men, we need men. So listen to what Benji's saying. Check out Exodus Cry, sign the petitions, reach out to me. We'll share, stop the movement in redefining refuge, because we need to unite the genders here. We need to be working together. But I do believe that once we get more men leading the front with the conversation, more men out there on the ground with the petition boards, and just really raising awareness, shining light from a male masculine standpoint. So, guys, hopefully today's conversation, brought some shine some light on some dark areas for you guys. We'll get Exodus Cry. Do you know the release dates of? You mentioned the tour here with Buying Her, and then the Raise on Porn. Do you kind of have a time frame on when these things are going to be released?
Yeah, so just a quick kind of breakdown. So we released Raised on Porn in 2021, and that film explores pornography's impact on consumers. And people can watch that for free on our Magic Lantern Pictures YouTube channel. I highly encourage that. One leader told me this is the most important film of our time. I truly believe that it's a really important film as a kind of entry point into this conversation. And then right now we're currently underway with the release of our docu-series Beyond Fantasy. You referenced the first episode of that called Barely Legal, and then we have an episode called Hardcore and an episode called Unsafe Sex. So those are extremely hard hitting, and I would just encourage people to watch them. But a strong disclaimer that it's very intense. They're very intense films as well. So just everyone, be thoughtful about your own decision whether or not to watch it. Um, and next year we're releasing another docu series called Entering Pornland, which is just the individual stories of people who went in and got chewed up by the porn industry and spit out. And and then uh, and then Buying Her is the film that we're doing this tour with. We just had our premiere at the Newport Beach Film Festival, and the premiere went really well. I just this film just resonates with men, and we did it focus groups with different groups of men, and all of them were in tears by the end. It takes you through such a range of emotions. And here's the thing: is like you know most guys have not tried to rape a woman. But when you hear somebody talk about that, the vulnerability that it takes to open up about, engaging in that level of, sexual violence, whatever, it has this effect of, if I'm a guy and I'm struggling with, let's say, your average Joe's maybe struggling with some porn consumption. And in his mind, he thinks I am this perverted imp. He feels alone. He feels like, why can't I get over this? I say I don't want to do it, then I go back to it, and he's stuck in this cycle of consumption and behavior and shame, and it's an awful place to be. Well, he goes and
Men I talk to every day.
there you go. So he goes out and watches a documentary like this. It creates some breathing room because it's like, okay, I'm not proud of myself, but I'm not that. So it's a great film to kind of open this conversation because it's the vulnerability that these 12 men that we interviewed display is just incredible. And so it takes you through this range of emotions, ultimately very aspirational and redemptive. And but I'm really excited about this film because for us it is, again, it represents a pivot towards an emphasis on inviting men into this conversation. So that's a film that we're really excited about bringing to communities around the US and around the world this next year. And if anybody out there is listening to this and would like to host one of these screenings, please let us know. We'll be hitting key cities around the US this spring, or in the spring of 2023. So that's another, yeah, thing to put out there as far as our films.
Where can they go to get more information on the screening, on the hosting of the screening? Is it a live and available, or just reach out to me and then I'll stay connected with you and your team?
Anyone can just go to our website at exoduscry.com or contact us at info@exoduscry.com. And yeah, happy to have those conversations.
Yeah, no, we're definitely going to do something here locally in the Tampa Bay area. I know multiple people where already know where we can screen it at theater wise and everything. So yeah, we'll definitely stay connected. I'm excited. Excited we connected to today, man. Like I said, I've been a big fan of your work for a really long time. Um, so we'll get everything shared down. We'll get Exodus Cry. We'll get the socials and everything. It almost seems like it doesn't make sense here to end with our last question, but I do want to maybe just bring a little bit of light to the conversation. This is the question we end every single episode here. Which first off, Benjamin, thank you so much for your time here today. Like I said, guys, we need men, so reach out to me. We'll get you connected if you want to screen, if you want support, and we'll share all the links down there. But the title of our show, Benji, is the Superhuman Life. For me, when I talk about living a superhuman life, I'm a believer, Christian as well, and I know your organization is. It's understanding or coming to a belief that you are here for a purpose. But I think a lot of people stop there. It's like God created me for a purpose. It's like, no, we now have a part that we need to play in that as well. So when I talk about living a super life, it's knowing you're here for a purpose, but then it's showing up intentionally and aggressively every single day to bring that purpose in service of others to the world. So I like to end every conversation with a guest take. So Benji Nolot, as we bring today's conversation to a close, how would you define living a superhuman life?
Yeah, I mean, I think that what you said, this idea of purpose, I I hear that as the thing I love about the idea of living your life with a purpose is ordering your life with intentionality. And so I think that the greatest tragedy in life is untapped potential and living short of our purpose. And so yeah, so I think intentionality is just such a huge thing. It would have been really, I look at that burning bush story of Moses and I go, man, like he could have kept walking. And it took some intentionality on his part to like stop and go pay attention and go observe. And and so I think in the same way, you know, I was simply informed of this issue and made conscious choices to put one foot in front of the other one. There are people who listen to this conversation now, and we have a choice now. What are we going to do with this information? How can we order our lives with intentionality to actually fulfill our purpose and make a difference in the world? And so that's what I would say to that.
Yeah, no, beautifully stated. Guys, we know today was heavy. It was hard hitting. For those of you that stuck till the end, reach out to Exodus Cry, sign these petitions, get on board with your local communities, get on board with whatever you can to raise awareness. But more importantly, like share today's episode. I ask you guys at the end of every single episode to share it with one person. I'm asking you today to share this with as many people as you possibly can. If you got an email list, load this into an email and blast it out. If you got women in your life, you got men in your life, today's conversation needs to be heard. Benji, brother, we thank you so much, man, for everything you're doing. I'm excited to continue to support you guys. Frank Richard, the Superman Life, we love you guys. See you in the next one.